God's house as a church body. Continue to watch over and guide all those on the sick list. Be with Brother Tony as he brings a message. Be with all of us as our travels home. In Jesus' name, amen.
Yeah, well, let's finish up our little time in Genesis here, I think we will tonight. Let's look at Genesis chapter 45. Genesis 45. So we got Joseph out of the pit. We've got him out of prison. We've got him before Pharaoh. Pharaoh placed him in such a position so that he could take care of the first family of God there, those Israel and his sons. And we see that Joseph, the last few chapters, having met them, has been right in the middle of testing them, right? Right in the middle of trying them, right in the middle of getting them to understand their guilt and to release all that animosity they had, get rid of the jealousy, get rid of the greed. And he has come to a place now where he is ready to reveal himself to his brothers. Now Joseph, particularly Joseph, serves to us as a type of Christ, right? Christ will one day also prove his people, right? He will see if they're still jealous. He'll see if they're still greedy. He'll see if they still feel guilty. That will happen during the tribulation. And also during that very time of the tribulation, just like Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, Jesus will reveal himself to his people. And at that time, they will take him back and worship him as Messiah. Now, it's funny that they spent all this time with Joseph. Now, I know time had passed. I know they hadn't thought about him except as that 17-year-old boy that they stripped of a nice coat and threw him down in the pit and sold him off to the Midianites. I know they when they see him like that. But time had passed and Joseph had become a man, a very powerful man in Egypt. And I'm sure he had all the Egyptian stuff where Hebrews and didn't shave a lot. I'm sure Joseph was clean shaven. And where they had rough clothes, he had city boy clothes. And where they lived out as nomads in tents and stuff, he had a palace, a house to live in, and his custom and the way he had to do just to be around Pharaoh, right? You just couldn't come to Pharaoh any kind of way. His mannerisms has changed, but still, they should have been able to recognize their own brother. Again, it speaks as a type of Christ, where it's only when Christ gets ready to reveal himself that we fully see him. So, as you're thinking about, as we go through this, remember, Joseph is a type of Christ, and for him, he serves these lessons for us. So, verse 1 of chapter 45 says, Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, Make everyone go out from me. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brother. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. So it had become an emotional strain on Joseph. They had passed the test of jealousy, where he had given his brother 5 times the amount of food as him. They had passed the test of greed. No longer were they after money. Matter of fact, by this time, money had become something that made them sick to see. They were no longer guilty of trying to get rid of their brother and cut him loose, because they had all agreed, and one of them, Judah, had even promised to take the place of his brother, as he explained the plight as he pleaded with and asked Joseph for pity on what would happen to his father if Benjamin were to stay. So he sees that this is a time where he could not restrain himself before him, and he just pushes everybody out, and he weeps so loud that the Egyptians around the house and the house of Pharaoh heard it. I don't know what that sounds like, but it sounds like he had a pretty good set of lungs, right? And here it is in verse 3. Then Joseph said to his brother, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? Brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. By the way, type of Christ, in the presence of Christ, when he reveals himself, we become undone and dismayed. That's just it. if you truly meet Christ, you realize how altogether worthy He is and how altogether worthless you are, and you become His mate. Anyway, that's just us passing through and me spiritualizing the text. It's not always a good thing, but I think I can get away with it here because that's absolutely the truth there. And Joseph said to his brothers, please come near me. So they came near, and they said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. So he loves them, and he wants to reveal himself to them, but he does not gloss over their guilt. He does not gloss over their sin. That's how Christ accepts us. He takes His blood and He washes us. His blood covers our sin. His blood makes atonement for us, and we're appeasement, and God the Father is satisfied. But He does not gloss over sin. If sin was something that was so easily gotten rid of, Christ would not have died on the cross. How offensive is sin to God? So much so that He had to send His Son and slay Him on the cross to cover the sin, to make it right between Him and us. That's how abominable sin is. I believe Brother Doug was talking about something the other day about the degree of sin and how he had to explain that there were no great sins or no small sins. In God's eyes, sin is sin. James in the New Testament, when he writes, he said that it's sin if we know to do right and we don't do it. It's wrong. So if we know we need to pray, if we know we need to honor God with the first fruits of our labor, if we know that we need to spend more time with Him, if we need to have a better relationship with our wife, a better relationship with our friends, have a good practice in business, or be honest with people about things, and we don't do that, then that's sin, and those things will meet us again, because we can be sure of one thing, that our sins will find us out, right? So He doesn't gloss over, and realizing that, His brothers, you can imagine, they have now come face to face with what they hadn't been willing to talk about. They are fixing to have to deal with a man that they had abandoned and sold into slavery and lied about, and who now their very fate was in His hands. So I can imagine that they were remembering that dream that he had that made them all mad. Because every time they had met Him since then, they have bowed down before Him. Lo, they have been at His mercy this whole time. So what He does is He doesn't gloss over sin, but in verse 5 it says, but now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourself because you sold me here. Don't let that bother you, guys. I'm going to tell you something here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. Now, I have in my mind looked there at the word soul and the word sin, right? Now, this is amazing how God does this, right? Man has a responsibility to do things, and man is responsible for the things that he does. Those brothers sold Joseph into slavery to get into Egypt. But Joseph looks at it after all this time has passed and realized that God had worked all things together for good for those who love Him. And instead of him saying, y'all sold me, he's able to look at it and said, God sent me. Now, how does God do that? How does that work out? Well, we find that again, as Joseph is a type of Christ, a shadow of Christ. Peter, over in the book of Acts in chapter 2, begins to preach, and somewhere around verse 23, he says that Christ was delivered into the hands of those men to be crucified by the foreknowledge and predetermined purpose of God. So God had knowledge and had determined that Christ would be crucified. And yet Peter does not let that go. I want to get the quote right. Peter doesn't let that go by. He says, him having been delivered by determined purpose and foreknowledge of God. That's God did this part, but you're responsible for this. You have taken by lawless hands and crucified and put to death. How is that possible? how is God's plan and our free will all caught up so that it all works out for God's intended purposes? I don't know. Perhaps there'll be some kind of remedial course in heaven. Perhaps for us slow learners, He will take a few days aside and allow us to ask questions and break that down in some kind of semblance of understanding how He works those things out, even though we were there. So even while they were selling, God was sending. So it was no need for them to be worried about it, because God had this thing planned out all along. So why did He do this? Sent you before me to preserve life. Not just the life of those brothers, but because of the vision and because of the preparation and because of what God had put in His hands, He was able to deliver not only His family from starvation through this famine, but He was delivering the nation of Egypt and all these other countries, because God's not just the God of Israel. God is the God of the whole world. When the psalmist writes that the world is the Lord's and the earth is the Lord's and the fullness of it thereof, he's talking about not only the cattle on the hill, but he's talking about all the minerals and substances that we find in the ground. It is His. He has full charge of it. He cares about every bit of it. Verse 6, for these 2 years, the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. Verse 7, and God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth and to save your life by a great deliverance. This was going to take all of resources of a bountiful 7 years of Egypt's production of food and storing it just right to make this where you can get through 7 years. Y'all just think it's bad. Y'all still got 5 more years to go. This is going to help put in their mind the idea that they need to do something, right? And Joseph said it's no small thing. This great deliverance is because of God's hand. And you just can't believe all God had to do to set this thing up just to take care of you and your families. Verse 8. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And He made me a father to Pharaoh and the Lord of all of his house and the ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. How great is the deliverance? Pharaoh comes and asks me for advice. I don't know if you see that there. But if you got a good father and he has some kind of knowledge of how things work, normally you would go to your father when you decided that you wasn't near as smart as you thought you were, right? And you would ask him for his wisdom. Pharaoh at this time had come to trust Joseph and to set him up as a wise man. And now, because of the provision he made in the 2 years of faithful administration he'd already done, Pharaoh was depending on Joseph for all kinds of things. And the Lord of all of his house and the ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. So, he's put everything in place. Again, his dream that he remembered was that the whole family would come together. He has laid out for them the reason why the whole family should come together. So in verse 9 it says, hurry up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me a lord of all of Egypt. Come down and do not tarry. What is it going to take to get Jacob down there? They're going to have to give a testimony about the son. Again, a type of Christ. Remember, Jesus gives testimony about the Father. The Spirit gives testimony about the Son. But the Father loves to hear about the Son. He loves to hear. If you were to pray to God and begin to really get involved in thanksgiving and gratitude, and you begin to say things like, Father, thank you so much for the exploits of your Son, how he healed all the people he healed, and how he walked with purpose and with purity on this earth, Lord. I thank you for the time that he made those blind to see. I thank you for the time he healed those lepers, Lord. But most of all, I thank you for his faithfulness to keep that very hour that you had appointed him to. Did not miss it, did not tarry, Lord. Did not flinch in it, but that set his face in stone toward Jerusalem in those last days and went there and was crucified on that cross, placing his hand in his life in yours, Lord, because he could find you faithful. You go testifying and giving testimony about the Son to the Father, and I want you to know something. The Father, he's not going to tarry. I kind of got excited just doing that right there. The Father won't tarry. He loves to hear about the Son. Verse 10. And you shall dwell in the land of Goshen. Now, why Goshen? You may not remember. Goshen is a very fertile land mass there. It has a lot of grass, and the Egyptians did not like sheep or sheep herders. So they would be out away from everybody and yet have all the provisions that it would take to raise their children, to have a successful community, because those 12 families go in and a mighty nation comes out 400 years later with a lot of possessions. So their sheep are going to be taken care of. All of this stuff's going to fall in place. Joseph has already decided and already picked for and already prepared the land that they would go to. By the way, another type of Christ who has already picked the land that we're going to. Abraham was looking for a city whose builder and maker was God, right? And Jesus has provided it for us because he has gone before us to prepare us a place. For his Father's house there is many mansions, right? So he's also given us a land to go to. And watch this, and you shall be near me. What better thing about a family than it all gets together and they get near him, right? Everything Joseph has done has been to restore the relationship, to have this family come back together, have this family prosper together. That's what will be in heaven. We'll be near Christ, and we'll be able, that family prospering together. You and your children and your children's children and your flocks and your herds and all that you have, there I will provide for you, lest you or your household and all of you have come to poverty, for there are still 5 years of famine. Again, putting one more emphasis on, you can either come here and let me take care of you, or you can stay there and everything you got, your kids, your flocks, all you have is going to be burned up in this famine, because it's still 5 years of it. 5 years of famine, I take care of knocking down the whole entire, at that time, house of Israel, if y'all don't come here. Verse 12. And behold, your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, see that it is in my mouth that speaks to you. So you shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and all that you have seen, and you shall hurry and bring my father down here. Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. Moreover, he kissed all of his brothers, right? That's that holy kiss. That's that reunion kiss, right? That's that, hey, everything's all right. We've made up. I'm not mad at you. There's no need of you worried about me having vengeance on me. We're all close together. And wept over them. And after him, his brothers talked with him. And now the report of it was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brothers have come. So it pleased Pharaoh and his servants well. So they heard the cry. They asked what happened. Well, Joseph is reuniting with his family. And even Pharaoh loves a story with a happy ending, right? He wants to get involved in this. But his heart's right in the hand of God. So God's twisting him to do exactly what he needs to do. The overwhelming of emotions and the whole happiness just for one man and his family getting better. Pharaoh don't want to stay on the sideline anymore. And Pharaoh says, now Joseph has already said what he's going to do, but now Pharaoh just says, say to your brothers, do this, load up your animals, and depart and go to the land of Canaan. Bring your father and your households and come to me, and I will give you the best land in Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. Who do we normally reserve the best land for, or the fat of the land for? Normally for citizens of the country, right? Pharaoh's going to give it to foreigners. There's also a fellow sitting in an office today who's doing the same thing, but I don't think it's for spiritual reasons. Bring your father and your household and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. Now you are commanded to do is take carts out of the land of Egypt. So, hey, I'm going to give you some U-Hauls. Not going to charge you. Budget rental. Get all that. Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. And also do not be concerned about your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. Then the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them carts according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for the journey. Hey, y'all gonna get home. You're going, you're gonna get home, you're coming back. Y'all stop by and fill up there at the Stop and Go. Right? You get some nabs and bought potato chips and some water. And we'll see y'all when you come back. Maybe you can pick up some of that tuna fish for watch today. Verse 22. And he gave to all them, to each man, changes of garment. Remember, changes of garment were just like currency back then. They were poor people. At best, they may have had 1 to 2 changes of garment. So by giving them clothes to wear, he was actually putting more possessions for them. But to Benjamin, he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garment. Yes, God love your brother, right? And he sent to his father these things: 10 donkeys loaded down with the good things of Egypt, 10 female donkeys loaded down with grain, bread, and food for his father for the journey. So he sent his brothers away, and they departed. And he said to them, "See that you do not become troubled along the way." What's he saying to them? Hey guys, everything's good right now. Y'all make sure you keep it like that. I know how y'all have a tendency to go off plan, off script sometimes. Don't do it this time. Stick to the plan. Stay down the road. Keep it out of the ditches. Right? If it's silly, don't do it. If it starts getting silly, stop doing it. Y'all come back. This is your one thing you have to do. Then they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father, and they told him, saying, "Joseph is still alive, and he is the governor over all the land of Egypt." And Jacob's heart stood still because he did not believe. Y'all were real bad at telling me some lies. What are y'all trying to do? And it's hard to stop. Verse 27, but when they told him all the words that Joseph had said to him, and when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob the father revived. And Israel said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive, and I will go see him before I die." I'm telling you, that sounds like reunion to me. Almost sounds like a spiritual revival right there in this family. Everybody's getting right. The truth is being told. All that junk has got out of the way. I'm telling you, some of the best thing you can do is just get that junk off your chest. Just free yourself of the guilt, whatever it is. And you may not can tell everybody what you need to say, but you can sure blurt it out to God in the middle of the woods somewhere and say, "Lord, you just take all this stuff. I know what I did. I know that you know what I did, and I don't want to do